something that had some ties to the Iranian regime and Iranian oil. But those are sort of separate from what I was looking at. For the most part, the ones that Bain Capital in Boston set up through these tax havens, these islands, basically Bermuda, the Caymans, the Jersey Islands, and whatnot, were really about investments in U.S. companies.
Bob Drogin, you write about Romney being the wealthiest candidate, personal fortune of up to what, $250 million.
I think that's a conservative estimate, but it's at least, it's somewhere in that range.
Tell us about Brad Malt and what he told you.
Brad Malt is head of Ropes & Gray. He's a lawyer. He is the trustee for what was originally set up as a blind trust for Mitt Romney's financial holdings when he was elected governor of Massachusetts in 2002. The blind trust is no longer quite so blind because last year, as part of his campaign disclosure forms, that we suddenly got to see what's in the trust in very broad terms. Among the things that we learned is that even though Mitt Romney claimed to have left Bain & Company in 1999, in fact, he was still there, still on the books, until he ran for governor, and he still has the right to invest and the right to continue to draw his profit share and his margin until 2009, and he still retains equity in, I believe I counted 32, or identified 32 separate Bain-related investment funds, as well as other funds that he has access to. What Brad Malt told me was, and I was specifically trying to understand these offshore operations, was that it really didn't matter whether these were set up in, in the Cayman Islands or Mars. The point was it was a way of attracting what he described as billions of dollars, and of course that's exactly right. That's what they were able to do. And he said these have been very sound investments for Romney. He's only looking at Romney's personal fortune here, that they've paid upwards of, he said, 20 to 30% a year, which obviously, beats T-bills or something, and that he's made, numerous investments in those funds since taking over the trust. So he was arguing, making the case, as the campaign did, that not only is there nothing wrong with these are not tax loopholes in the sense that Mitt Romney doesn't gain any tax advantage from it, but the fact that they're quite wise investments on his part.
Now, to the degree that these firms are operating offshore, and I assume that the investors themselves are not necessarily known, doesn't it create a problem in terms of if Romney does get elected, not really knowing the partnerships or the business relationships that his firm has had in the past in terms of once he becomes president?
Yeah, well, potentially so. I mean, these are private companies. These are closed funds. There's the whole point of going offshore is because there's less transparency than in the American system. It's not simply that they are tax havens. There's no income tax. There's no corporate tax, etc. There's no transparency in those places. I mean, they're shell companies. They're set up, in a mailbox that operates through a Delaware company, that, a holding company and a limited partnership and whatnot. And I'm not a business reporter. I'm just trying to figure out what does the guy own and where does it come from. And I got to tell you, it's not simple. I mean, it took me weeks to just figure out when he left Bain Company. There's nobody up there who'll give you a straight answer, and it's not listed in the corporate records. Now, the whole point of this is to get away from Securities and Exchange Commission filings. That's the reason you do these things.
Now, Bob Drogin, Bain is poised to take over Clear Channel, this massive radio conglomerate around the country, owns over 1,200 radio stations. Bob.
Okay.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Also, I wanted to ask you about the AMPAD deal, and we only have a minute to go.
Okay. AMPAD was basically one of the deals that came back and really caused a problem for Romney. Back in 1994, when he ran against Ted Kennedy, when he made his first bid for elected office, he ran for the U.S. Senate seat from Massachusetts. AMPAD was a company they bought in 1992, and Bain Capital made a big investment and essentially bought the company. And after they bought it, the new management team that went in closed factories, fired a lot of people, and really slashed the operations. And when when he ran for Senate, some of these striking workers came and picketed him and really dogged his campaign, and it created a pretty ugly labor dispute. I think Kennedy described, Romney at the time as putting profits over people. And after the campaign was over, they took AMPAD public, and he lost. They took AMPAD public, and it prospered for about a year, and then it crashed into bankruptcy. And by then, Bain and laid off, several thousand people. By then, Bain Capital had taken out. I was able to document $102 million, and that was a model that we saw in a number of places. I found about at least a half a dozen companies where Bain Capital essentially bought in, laid people off, stripped it down, took out, in some cases, tens of millions of dollars or hundreds of millions, and then the company crashed into bankruptcy.
Bob Drogin, we're going to have to leave.